Welcome to a deep dive. We're digging into a really complex situation today. Got a whole stack of articles, research, notes you shared.
Yeah, it's quite the convergence. You've got cutting-edge tech, heavy industry, big public investment, and some incredibly sensitive materials all coming together.
Exactly. The focus is this company, Anduril. They're a defense tech player, making a big move into Ohio.
And there's this surprising link, isn't there, to nuclear material production happening nearby.
That's right. So our mission today, based on these sources, is to kind of unpack all these pieces.
See what the connections are, what the key insights are, and, understand the implications, this whole nexus forming in Ohio.
Okay, let's jump in. Anduril. They present themselves as, like, the Silicon Valley disruptor, but for defense, move fast and break things.
Right. Applying that Silicon Valley playbook to military hardware. Founded by Palmer Luckey, people might know him from Oculus VR.
And backed by some big names, Peter Thiel, for instance. The sources point to this, just meteoric rise. Valuation hitting near $28 billion.
Yeah, and the sources do note that while disruption sounds good in tech, applying it to defense, well, it raises questions.
How so?
That rapid pace, the sources suggest, could potentially sidestep some of the usual, maybe slower oversight that traditional defense contractors face.
Gotcha. And their technology, it's built around something called Lattice OS, an AI command system.
That's the core, yeah. The sources call it the heart of their operation, gives this sort of God's eye view for military or even border surveillance uses.
And specific systems. I see things like Anvil for drones.
Right, drone interceptors. Then there's Fury, that's their unmanned combat aircraft, the UCAV, that's slated for Ohio production.
Okay, and Barracuda cruise missiles. The sources mention hyperscale production, affordable mass.
And that's a key phrase, affordable mass. The sources really emphasize this. When you combine that affordability with increasing autonomy.
It makes using them easier.
Potentially, yes, it lowers the barrier. If weapons are cheaper, potentially driven more by algorithms than humans making every single call, the sources argue war could become, easier and faster to start.
They're also into hypersonics, right? Testing motors for the Navy.
They are. It's part of that global race everyone's talking about. But the sources we looked at are a bit skeptical.
Saying they offer few meaningful advantages over current missiles.
Exactly. But more critically, the sources flag these new escalation dangers.
Escalation?
Because they're so fast, there's a risk they could be mistaken for incoming nuclear missiles in a crisis. That confusion, the sources warn, could lead to miscalculation, maybe even preemption, pushing things potentially to the nuclear level.
Okay, so that brings us to Ohio. And Duril's building this huge facility, Arsenal 1, near Rickenbacker Airport. Almost $1 billion.
Yeah, a massive investment. And the sources show it started under wraps, this Project Thor. Investigative journalism really brought it into the light.
And there were issues locally. The sources mentioned zoning controversies and transparency issues.
Right, persistent ones. Questions about how these decisions get made, how much the public knows beforehand.
Speaking of public knowledge, let's talk public money. Ohio put up a lot, didn't they?
Oh, definitely. The sources detail, $70 million directly?
Plus that enormous tax credit, around $450 million over 30 years. And infrastructure money, too.
About $86 million for infrastructure, yeah. It adds up fast. And critics, noted in the sources, are calling it corporate welfare.
Questioning tying the state's economy so tightly to the often unpredictable defense sector.
Exactly. Now, shift down the road a bit to Piketon. This place has a history.
Right. The old Portest plant. Contamination issues. Didn't they close a school? Zahn's Corner.
That's mentioned in the sources, yes. And ongoing lawsuits related to that past contamination.
And now Centrus is operating there, producing HAEU.
Correct. High-assay, low-enriched uranium. It's enriched uranium, but to a higher level than standard reactor fuel, 5 to 20% U-235.
And the sources highlight that this is, quote, closer to weapons grade.
That's the concern flagged. The sources state it can be fairly easily enriched to weapons grade, 90% plus, big proliferation risk.
And environmental worries, too. Recent reports of radiological discharges.
Yes, uranium, plutonium isotopes mentioned in the sources exceeding international water guidelines, though apparently within current U.S. limits, it raises flags.
The regulatory side seems murky, too. The NRC didn't initially do a full environmental impact statement.
The sources say they did a less comprehensive assessment first. The DOE required the full EIS, but only after the project was already running, which seems backward.
And the purpose of this HAEU? Officially civilian, but the military link seems strong.
Very strong. The sources cite a $115 million no-bid contract specifically justified for military purposes. It's called critical fuel for military applications.
Like for smaller reactors on military bases.
That's one application mentioned, enabling smaller reactor footprints. The sources even mention secretive talks between Centrus and Saudi Arabia about nuclear tech exports. Lots of layers here.
So let's connect the dots in Ohio then. You have Anduril at Arsenal 1 making advanced AI-driven weapons.
Centrus in Piketon making this sensitive HALEU fuel.
And Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, a major research hub and customer right there too.
It paints a picture, doesn't it? The sources describe it as a potential dangerous integrated ecosystem
For developing, producing, maybe even deploying these next-gen weapons, possibly nuclear-capable, AI-driven.
That's the hypothesis emerging from the sources, that this convergence fuels a new nuclear arms race, pairing advanced AI with these enhanced nuclear materials.
And the state government is involved. Governor DeWine partnering with the Air Force Lab.
Yes, an MOU on AI and autonomy. The state's actively promoting this, using taxpayer funds framed as job creation and rebuilding the arsenal.
We also see that revolving door thing mentioned. An Anduril exec moving to a high-level Army job.
Michael Opedal, yeah. The sources use it as an example of the potentially close ties between industry and policymaking, securing a contract on the way out, reportedly.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive, what's the big picture from the sources?
It's this really complex, maybe concerning convergence in Ohio. You've got Anduril's disruptive, autonomous tech approach
Funded heavily by taxpayers, with transparency questions.
happening right near a facility producing HALEU, a material with its own environmental and proliferation risks, clearly linked to military needs despite some doublespeak.
All forming this potential pipeline for future warfare, blurring lines, military, civilian, corporate, public.
Yeah, the sources strongly suggest this whole setup contributes to a new arms race dynamic, pushing towards more automated conflict, increasing global risks.
And for you, the listener, this isn't just some abstract Ohio story. The sources show it touches on how your tax dollars get spent, the future of global security, the ethics of autonomous weapons.
And that accelerating push towards a new kind of arms race.
So here's a final thought the sources leave us with. What does it really mean when that tech world drive for disruption and efficiency crashes into the ultimate stakes of war and peace?
And maybe more pointedly, how much transparency should we demand when public money and materials like enriched nuclear fuel are involved in shaping that future? Something to think about.